welcome back to Castle Goring, chatting with Lady C. Hello, Georgie. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Leo. How are you?
I'm excellent.
I'm glad to hear that you're excellent.
Yes, thank you. So let's go with the first question.
Yes.
So the first question is, do you know Lady Anne Glenconner?
Well, I know who Anne Glenconner is, and I know who Lady Glenconner is. I'm afraid I don't know who Lady Anne Glenconner is. I take it that's how the question was addressed.
Yes.
She used to be Lady Anne Cook, then she was Lady Anne, what the hell was her husband's? Colin Tennant. She was Lady Anne Tennant. Then when Colin succeeded to his father's barony, she became Lady Glenconner. She's now Lady Glenconner. So I don't know her at all. I've never met her. I'm pretty sure I'd have remembered that I'd met her if I had met her. But I knew her husband, Colin. Her husband, Colin, was a great friend of my sister-in-law, Jeanie Campbell. And I've read in some book quite recently that Jeanie and Colin might have had an affair. I can't remember which book I read it in. Jeanie never ever told me that she had an affair with Colin, but when I married my ex-husband, she got in touch with Colin and said, "You've got to meet my sister-in-law." And I remember the very first time I met Colin, he came around to a little cottage we'd taken on Coulson Street, which Charles Delavigne, Cara Delevingne's father, had organised for me. I used to be friendly with Charles in those days. And Colin came around with his Panama hat and a young man in tow, and we became quite chummy. He was a very interesting person. Her book, can we show it here?
Yes, and that's the Lady Glenconner.
Anne Glenconner's book is absolutely wonderful.
Yes.
I've never met her. I would be delighted to meet her. She is clearly a great character.
Yes.
And she's had the most extraordinary life.
Yes.
And she's obviously a really lovely, lovely person.
Yeah, she used to be the lady in waiting to Princess Margaret.
Yes. I've seen her at things, but I don't recall ever having met her, and I'm pretty sure I'd have recalled it because I was friendly with Colin, who was a very naughty boy. But I leave it to the readers of her autobiography because it's a splendid book. It captures the time absolutely perfectly, and it also is really very revealing. She doesn't hold back. She pulls no punches. Well, she pulls a few because she's actually very nice about Colin, while Colin was quite a nightmare to be married to. Her Colin as well as my Colin.
Both troublemakers.
So, yeah. So, next question.
So the next question is regarding the Meghans pregnancy.
Yes.
So, do you think that Meghan was faking her pregnancy?
Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. I go into all the circumstances surrounding Meghan's pregnancy in my book. I go into the consequences of various scenarios, let me put it that way. You know, the whole issue of Meghan's pregnancy is a legal minefield for anybody who wishes to address it straightforwardly, which I have done in the book. I think it would be very injudicious of me in an interview now, before the book is coming out, because, you know, we have a few minutes in which to cover a subject that takes up quite a few pages in the book. So it wouldn't do justice to the subject or to the people involved if I consolidated. So I'm not going to consolidate, but I would say yes, in the book I cover it comprehensively. Next subject, please, Leo, please.
Okay. So the next question is, did you know Camilla and Mark Shand?
Well, I wouldn't have said I know Camilla. We've been in the same room, we've crossed paths, but I don't really know her. I've also met her sister Annabel Elliot a few times because we had great friends in common, and yes, I knew their brother Mark. Their brother Mark, I've got a picture of Mark here with me. It's from my autobiography, and this is it. I suppose maybe you could possibly do something for people to see it if you'd like. Mark and me in Jamaica in early 1973. Then Mark came out with Michael Waterhouse, who was his good friend, to stay with Michael's aunt, Lady Sarah Spencer Churchill, who was my good friend. So I was in the house party for the full length of their visit, because we were all the same age, etc., etc. Mark took a little bit of a shine to me. I did not like Mark in that way. He was regarded as very attractive, very desirable, etc., etc., etc. If you like that physical type, which I did not, he was divinely attractive. He was a really great guy. We remained friends throughout, but I saw him not too long before he died at a party, and I mean, he was a really, really nice guy. It was terrible how, because he was on blood thinners, and he fell and hit his head and died. It was awful, 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 awful. Terrible shock for his sisters. I came to England later that year and spent, I think, from April till December in England. Going back and forth between other countries, but basically based in England. And I ran into Mark in Annabel's right after I arrived. He offered to drop me home, which he did. I don't remember what's in my autobiography, it was written so long ago. But when he died, Camilla Long, very naughtily, I asked her not to do it, but she did it. But she's a very naughty girl, even a brilliant writer and a brilliant columnist. So Mark fancied me very much, as it turns out. And when he couldn't make any headway, he decided that if he was close by, he would make headway. So he bought the flat under where I was living. Which I thought was just amazing. And we remained great friends, but he never did make any headway. With me, no always meant no. I always knew within maybe seconds of meeting somebody whether they'd flick the light switch or not, and if they didn't, then I'm afraid there was no way around it.
Okay.
But he was a really great guy. So yes, I did know Mark. He married Cleo Goldsmith, if I remember correctly. Then they got divorced, and they have a very nice daughter. He used to be in business, if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong. I think he used to do art dealing with Andrew Fraser. Andrew, because I nearly sold the picture through Andrew. This would have been in the late 70s. Andrew was Lord Lovat's second son, and he was married to Charlotte, who was the daughter of the Earl of Warwick, and Sarah Corrivat, she'd been Sarah Chester Beatty. And in the 80s, I think it was, Sarah sold for a Picasso that they had for more money than had ever been paid for a Picasso. But Camilla, we never really were friends. Although, funnily enough, we lived in the same complex of flats, the Cundy Street flats. She lived in Stackhouse, I lived in Lochmoor House, but we didn't live there at the same time. And, you know, Camilla had her life in the country. Mark had his life all over the place. Mark was very romantic, very romantic. I mean, he was a real romantic. And, you know, when he had a passion for a girl, he had a real passion for the girl. He had a series of really fabulous girlfriends, like Marie Helvin, the model, who was married to David Bailey. They had a roaring affair after me, but I never. We just remained friends. So, next question.
So the next question is, there was many questions and comments regarding the royal family and how the royal family works. So, are they Zara and Peter members of the royal family?
Zara and Peter Phillips, you mean?
Phillips, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, several people have addressed the issue of whether Zara, in fact, some people have remonstrated with me because they seem to think that Zara and Peter Phillips are members of the royal family. Well, they're not. There are very definite rules as to what constitutes a member of the royal family. The British royal family is constituted of the monarch, the monarch's consort, the monarch's parents, so only one could be alive, which would be the mother, but she remains a member of the royal family, or grandmother, if she's still alive, as say Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and Queen Mary when Queen Elizabeth II ascended the throne. The Queen's consort, Prince Philip, the Queen's children, the Queen's siblings, or the monarch's siblings, the monarch's grandchildren, those are the entire members of the royal family. The title Royal Highness and Prince does not descend beyond that, except by special decree. The Queen has made the Cambridge children princes and princesses, but if she didn't make them princes and princesses, they would have not been princes and princesses. They would have been merely lords and ladies until such time as their grandfather acceded to the throne, when they would have moved up one generation and then become members of the royal family. So it's really very simple. Princess Margaret used to make the point that her children were not royal, and they're not royal. They are members of the extended royal family without being royal. Zara and Peter Phillips are not members of the royal family. Their mother is a member of the royal family. Even if they had titles, which they do not, they would still not be members of the royal family. They'd be merely aristocrats. This is very clearly demonstrated by the previous Princess Royal, Princess Mary, who was the sister of King George V. She married At the time, his name was Lord Lascelles, then he became Lord Harwood. He was Viscount Lascelles, then he became the Earl of Harwood. They had two sons, George and Gerald. Gerald was only ever the Honourable Gerald Lascelles, and their other son, George, ultimately became, he started out being the Honourable George Lascelles, then he became Viscount Lascelles, then he became the Earl of Harwood. He used to be a big figure in the opera world, and I used to run across him because my cousin Sir Peter Jonas was also a huge figure in the opera world. He was for many years the managing director of the English National Opera, which George Harwood had been before. There has never been any question that the Harwood family is not royal. The Snowdon family is not royal, and the Phillips family is not royal either. The fact that all of them had mothers who were princesses doesn't make them royal. So I hate to disappoint people when they say that Zara and Peter Phillips are members of the royal family. They are not. They are members of the Phillips family. So that's it.
Okay.
So next
question is, what are your thoughts on Archie not having any titles, and do you think that he could get any titles in the future?
Well, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. That's a rather more contentious question and a rather more contentious issue than the previous question. I address the whole issue in my book. It is really rather complex, and it is a rather difficult question to address in 3 sound bites. My feelings on the issue are also inappropriate to be brought into either this conversation or indeed my book, because it's not my child. I actually feel that if you have an aristocratic lineage and it is possible for your child to be a part of that, that it is imperative that it become a part of it. I will keep myself out of this, and I will keep Harry and Meghan out of it, and I will use the late June Aberdeen, who was the Marchioness of Aberdeen, and she moved heaven and earth for her 4 adopted children to be made lords and ladies, because up until then, if you were adopted, you were plain Mr. and Mrs. And she thought it was extremely unfair that the children were treated as second-class citizens when they should have been treated as members of the genuine family. And she nobbled the Queen so long and so hard that the Queen actually made all adopted children courtesy lords and ladies and or honourables in this country. So there are other countries that have other systems. In Russia, under the monarchy, I mean, anybody who reads War and Peace will see that one of the heroes of War and Peace is born illegitimate, but his father's a count. He then is legitimized via acknowledgement by the father and becomes a count, as well as inheriting his father's great fortune. So under the Russian system, if you were legitimized and or if you were adopted, you would become you would inherit the title. The same is true of papal titles. At the moment, there is Prince Jonathan Doria Pamphili, who was adopted by his mother, who was the Princess Doria Pamphili in her own right, and he is acknowledged as a prince. It's a papal title, it's not an Italian title, so papal titles still have validity because, of course, the papacy is a secular state as well as being, affiliated to the Catholic Church. I think we can put it like that. But in the British system, until very recently, if you were adopted, you could not have a title. Now you can. And it's always worked very much in favor of foreign titles because many foreign countries allow you to be adopted by, and often by, members of the family. And also Indians, for instance. I used to know the Rajmat of Jaipur. She's dead now, Ayesha Jaipur. She was a great friend of my mother-in-law. And she actually was a great friend of the Queen and Prince Philip as well. Her husband was the adopted son of one of the other Maharajas. So it was really quite standard. And I know very vaguely King Michael of Romania's former Chancellor, Prince Constantine Brancovan. He's actually a Știrbe. The Știrbes are an even greater, or at least equally great, Romanian princely family. But I think it was his grandfather or great-grandfather, who was Prince Știrbe, was adopted by a relation because the Brancovan title was going to die out. It's quite common in many European monarchies to have this system. It's not been so common in England. Very occasionally, without, it was never done by adoption, but it would be done by some decree that, for instance, the Dukes of Northumberland are now Percys, and they were originally Percys, but as Harry Northumberland, the late Duke, the present Duke's brother, who was a friend of mine, he used to say, well, we're actually not Percys at all, we're Smithsons, because they are descended from the Smithson who created the Smithsonian Institution in America. And even the Churchills are actually not Churchills. The Churchills, because John Churchill's son and heir died, so the first Duke of Marlborough, his only son, died. So the title was inherited by his daughter Henrietta, who was Lady Godolphin, and when she died, she passed it on to her nephew, the Earl of Sunderland. Hence why the Dukedom of Marlborough's subsidiary, tertiary title really, is the Earl of Sunderland, which was the primary title of the Spencer family. Then after that got absorbed by the Churchill family, the Spencers became Earls Spencer. But to wrap it up quite neatly, Churchills are officially Spencer Churchill, and throughout the 19th century, until very late in the 19th century, they were never known as Spencer Churchill. They were always known as Spencer. Then they tacked on the Churchill, and now, of course, they more or less dropped the Spencer. Or they dropped it until, of course, the marriage between Diana and Charles. When they picked it up again. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer on the questions. keep writing your questions in the comments.
Some really juicy questions, please, 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 please. Can I, please, pretty please?
There will be many of them, I'm sure. Okay, thank you very much.